Greetings. I'd like to welcome you. So I'm Stuart Deschel and like to welcome you to tonight's poetry reading. If we were meeting in person, I would ask you to respect the liquor laws of the state of North Carolina when you drink the great wine we were going to serve, and also, to enjoy yourself at the feast we usually prepare from all the great caterers in Greensboro and the wonderful cakes and such. And also, I would thank the booksellers at Scuppernong or at the college bookstore for all the work that they've done. But instead, I can only offer you some great poetry this evening. And this evening, the poetry comes in the form of Ira Sadoff, who is the author of 9 volumes of poetry, among them Settling Down, A Northern Calendar, Grazing, True Faith, and of course, Country Living, his newest collection, which we are here to celebrate in our cyber manner this evening. Ira has also published the novel Uncoupling, the Ira Sadoff Reader, which contains poems, stories, and essays, and History Matters, contemporary poetry on the margins of American culture, a collection of essays, some of which appeared in American Poetry Review. Sadoff has published well over 300 of his poems, 30 short stories, and numerous essays in magazines, including The New Yorker, the American Poetry Review, the Paris Review, The Nation, The New Republic, Esquire, the late lamented Antaeus magazine, the Hudson Review. His work has been awarded the Shestak Prize from American Poetry Review, the Pushcart Prize, and the George Bogan Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of America. And Ira has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, if you'll excuse me. He has taught in the graduate programs of the University of Virginia, University of Iowa, Warren Wilson University, and for many years his career at Colby College. Previous to that, he taught at Hobart College and Antioch College, the latter at which I had the great good fortune to take his poetry workshop. Studying with Ira was the jet fuel needed for my poetry. He taught us the contemporary poets and the international writers still so dear to me and my classmates, who included poets like Laura Scheck, James Galvin, Stephen Kramer, Jean Day, Victor Sanchez, and Sarah Gorham. Many of us went on to teach at places like Iowa, Lesley College, the New School, and UNC Greensboro, not to mention the many students he mentored at his other universities. With his enthusiasm, devotion to the art, and sense of humor, Ira taught us how to teach and instilled in us his own dedication, and I hope instilled in us as well, integrity. We are here this evening to hear him read from his astonishing new book, Country Living. It's fully empowered, yet retains that essential curiosity and sense of self and world discovery that continually enlivens his poetry and his readers. For to read an Ira Sadoff poem, particularly in this new collection, is never to stand still. The poems in Country Living sometimes begin in country places, but move swiftly through time and place. Ira's heroes are here, mostly the musical ones in this collection, Schubert and Monk and Chet Baker, but also Hawthorne and Wittgenstein and Michelangelo appear. But don't be fooled. These are not works of ekphrasis, but deep exploration and discovery, and alive. From the gentle surrealism of his first book, Settling Down, through the deep wisdom of his later collections, with psychological complexity and humane complicity, he provokes the body politic and the purveyors of hypocrisy. I have always admired the quality of rebellion in his work, the sense of the writer as at times a necessary provocateur, and even the provocateur of his own self and the self's actions. Ira is one of the few poets who can write about emotions and intelligence with emotion and intelligence. As poet Jane Mead wrote, I go to Sadoff's poems for their rich honesty, their deep humanness, their complexity of vision and their energy. He is original, wholly relevant, indispensable. I so agree with you, Jane. I'd like to present my former teacher, well, always my teacher and mentor, and my friend, Ira Sadoff. Ira.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Can everyone hear me now? Am I audible? Okay, good. That was such a moving tribute. I really appreciate it so much, Stuart. You and the students you mentioned are among the hundreds of reasons I feel grateful for having had a long teaching career as well as a writing life. So thank you so much. And my only regret is that I don't see you in person so we can sit and talk close by. Well, hello everyone else. I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to read virtually exclusively from my new book. And I guess the best way to help you get to know me is to start with the poem Biographical Sketch. Biographical Sketch. I've been a soft touch, a rough ride. I took shots at congressmen, left an outrageous tip for a waif whose hand was shaking as she poured my tea. I made the sound of a wolf in Naomi's bedroom, was shabby at her wedding, sulking while pinning an amorous note to her gown. I refused to cross a picket line, then bought a handsome silk shirt sewn in the most downtrodden district in China. This when I was learning to be a person, which even now is an unfinished symphony. But no one warned me about the solemn passages, when we know no one, when we could die far from home, with our bungled furies and crushes yammering beside us. Not yet, not yet. This poem is called A Few Surprising Turns. I guess it's a childhood poem. A few surprising turns follow us everywhere. I was shopping for something to replace what I once felt. Weren't there buildings where we once lived, fully furnished, that looked out over the river? A festival somewhere? At the core, we were traipse and meander, lacking a clock when we ran into a war, and some items to love. A lovely vintage teapot and a stash of old photographs where unhappiness could be scored. But that's not the tale we share. It takes more than two tongues to bring us forward to where we could shine just by recalling a few useless details, as if in school. The capital of Nebraska, the acid formula for vinegar, the day my father walked out the door. I just want to make sure that I'm loud enough so that people can hear me, or do I need to like pump up the volume? I'm good. I see some thumbs, and I like thumbs. Okay, here we go. It's the strange part of not having the audience going like this while you're reading. Next poem is called Ode to the Defense Mechanism. And it's a poem that has its origin in the Midwest. My temperament is not suited for the Midwest, as you'll see in about 3 lines. And you may not know the meaning of Schadenfreude. It's a German word for pleasure that comes from learning of someone else's troubles. not nice. Ode to the Defense Mechanism. Some of the deadpan comes from the flatness, the feigned all-rightness, the sickening thrum of Kansas, taking all day to drive through that treelessness. Inside the hardness of the heart, the numbness of the heart, there lay a smaller heart, a splinter in your finger, throbbing and pulsing, so you can see how alive you are. God, what a fenestration the heart is. What strangers find is frontispimatter, an intro to the highlights as we see them. All our old loves are still there, impervious and glass enclosed. You can tap on the glass and get a rise out of them, because into each life there must be a ruler and a grid, a little schadenfreude, so it won't be our hearts breaking. Wilderness. Just yesterday, when I came upon a snow-patched meadow above the tree line, the air so thin, my hike left me out of breath. In this green, unkempt site, just off the map, I saw a pond with moose, cows, and bulls, and a fangle slurping at its edge until some sound stirred them. How clumsy and rushed their exit, and what a cluttered music their hooves made on the granite ledge. That set off the magpies warbling and screeching like a sea of cicadas. I couldn't tell you where I was. I can't describe the jumble of sensations, the dizzying changes in the light, clouds appearing, passing, shading my whole field of vision. It all just slid into my horizon without raising a finger. I come from the land of laments and heavy lifting. The Apostle Paul and I, we both worked hard to please a God. If not a God, then someone divine. And I could say we were both blinded. But really, there was just very little light and shadow at dusk. So I went back to the husk of my car, the meaning still sealed in my body. I couldn't climb out of it to raise the unspeakable. I couldn't bring it to my throat, so I kept it with me. Here's the Michelangelo poem that Stuart referred to. And I want to dedicate this to Stephen Kramer, who gave one of the best analyses of it, so much so in a review, so much so that I learned something from a reviewer about my own poem, which, as anybody who's written for any length of time knows, that's an extremely rare occasion. Self-Portrait with Michelangelo. In the Star Theater of Rome, New York, I paint ceilings on the ladder to heaven where the air is thin. After a few brushstrokes, I sit on the top rung to savor the figures of light and shadow on screen. I want to save them, but also send them some to islands where they can't beguile or terrify. It's a revelation to come out of the theater so absorbed by their voices and grimaces, these acts of creation, translucent as we are, substantial and eternal, a state of mind the body can't kill off. As one lies away on Guadalupe, muse to herself only, I conjure her sketching a waterfall, eating cassava and Christophine, hoarding perfumes and scarves in Porta Pietra. She's all flashes and cloudbursts. There's infinitesimal movement between the frames, so you can't register the changes. I call her Liza, so you're attached to her. And the name, Liza. She has reddish brown hair and green eyes, smiles too much, and loves to swim too close to sharks. I don't want her swallowed up by life itself, because she's a complete stranger to me. I'm endlessly curious. Isn't that love? Knowing and not knowing, framing a gesture to make her familiar. I make everything up. Her jasmine scent, the delicate powder on the screen of her forehead. But how can I paint the streets and their screens to come back to earth with the darkness it deserves, where I live with my ordinary friends, the divine? If this were an in-person reading, I'd have a bottle of plastic water. I had to supply this for myself. This is from the second section of the book. And this is the first poem in that second section. Broken Sonnet for the Universe. I know I'm worth 15 cents to the universe. I don't know a thing about, you name it. But if the world were still made of brightness and shades of green, surfaces that flutter and turn to stillness, perhaps we would not live like starlings, devouring everything from seeds to insects, from fruit to carrion. Maybe we need more planets to use up and toss aside. Forget the green palm leaves of the Amazon. But if we lose the marsh, the rails and bitterns, if we lose the stream bed, the thirsty trees that lean over the water, how dry this universe, how ghostly, how gone. My Tulsa. Embedded in this poem is the story of the aerial bombing of an African-American neighborhood in Tulsa, where after white folks came into a Black neighborhood thinking there'd been some violence committed to them, the police used helicopters and planes to bomb the Black neighborhood in Tulsa in 1920. The triangle fire that's mentioned here is a fire that was started in a garment factory, and workers were trapped there because there were no exits. The employer didn't want exits. They didn't want the employees to get out, so many people died. My Tulsa. In Tornado Alley, where the ground opens up once in a while before it seals back up, you get glimpses, an upskirt of the city. What was once the home of lovers' quarrels became Black neighborhoods, aerial bombings. What was once the home of the Locopacha is now the Hokey Pokey. Not much I make of this before my time, this. I didn't do it, except everything is glued to me, nailed there in a poster. In Tulsa, I am alone. True, in a who cares kind of way, more feeling I've been planted in someone else's country. I mean, the way I strode, tilted my head, little jokes I told cashiers, never even brought a stare. So I thought of cities where we fix our attention on the sidewalk, not to be penetrated by leers, not to see strangers see how years have twisted our expressions. Oil told a story here, the way the triangle fire told the story of the Weinbergs, Greenspans, and Cohens. I stood on that corner at Washington Place last year. There too, when I closed my eyes, ashes stirred the air. Old selves. One of the advantages of being old is you have a lot of selves. One of the disadvantages of being old is you have a lot of selves. Old selves. Okay, I no longer want them. The many selves I had to manage that exhausted everyone. I believed in angels then. I thought I might be one. That would be me flying off on a tangent just to land on someone's balcony. But so little could I see from there. I longed for company with wings. Too often I took flight just to feel the air slap my cheek. Patriot. Those who read the book know that I'm compulsively concerned with social justice and the history of this country, which is a lot less concerned. Patriot. And this poem was written when I was, after I got off an airplane where there were a lot of people who were from Europe, and it was uncomfortable being an American. Patriot. I need a new lens to view the sordid whatnots of my government. Dense and dreary, with flashes of fireworks and manly displays of encroachment and invasion. That's what got us here. What a body of work we've become, taking over bars, defending our favorite countries, inspiring dread and dismay, and enough agitation so when I board a plane to fly over the mayhem we've made, I come back to the blunder debacle compartment, prepared to endorse everything faulty, meager, wanting. Then I remember the founder of this country and the slaves he owned. In his very lengthy will, he freed the one who brought him his housecoat and tea. That's the Washington I want to remember. Now I'm going to read a couple poems from the last section of the book, and then I'll let everybody have a good time. This first poem in the third section is a poem dedicated to the smarty pants of the world. It's called In the House of Wittgenstein, and it has as an epigraph, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Ludwig Wittgenstein. He never saw the malls of Petaluma, nor met the amazing cricketer Montezuma. He never heard a laugh track. We'd like to see him stroke a cat wrapped in a caftan. Let him find a mechanic for our mufflers, or raise sandbags in Port-au-Prince. Only once did he eat a plantain, and in his notebook described the process as sloshing through the Everglades. Otherwise, he was a word hotel. His best friend was a hut in Norway. Maybe he was smart enough for a table of 12. He could play all 12 parts. What's to be done with a man who lives in his head? Ira, my friend, are you listening? In the aviary. This in the Central Park Zoo. In the aviary, I could never sit in one place until I spent a whole afternoon with canaries, then one with the parrots, then two with the cockatoos. In the aviary, birds are always flying into nets, plexiglass, swooping down to a branch, pecking free an insect from the bark. They're not always singing, but when they do, it's rarely in a minor key. And their stillness we take as a sign of trust. With all their colors, their preening of themselves and each other, they must think they matter. Before them, I was always moving on to the next thing. And yet, had been my mantra. But I am neither subject nor object of their meanders. I spend my days invisible in the cinema of the tropics, under the great tent of a sealed-in universe. I'm going to read that last line again. I spend my days invisible in this cinema of the tropics, under the great tent of a sealed-up universe. Sorry, I messed that up. And I'm going to read, do I have time to read 3 more poems? Yeah, okay, I just got another thumbs up. Those are my favorite things, these thumbs up. Ithaca. I've been blessed with a few gusts of wind, a few loves to wave goodbye to. I still think of Mother's kitchen, sorry for tantrums of way back when. No frost lodged in me then. In those days, snow spread through town like an epidemic. How archival the blankness seemed. If you flew above the shell of the old house, it was nothing really. There was no story to our little ranch house, so you couldn't hear a thing. Deathbed Confession. Côte de Rhône, for all you people who don't know wine, is a wine. Bird, for all you people who don't know Charlie Parker, is Charlie Parker. Deathbed Confession. I don't regret the sailboat I never got when I was 10. That I might have made a great psychiatrist or holed up in Tuscany instead of Schenectady. Mastered the clarinet. My only lament is I was less than joyful. I could have used more bliss. You know how many years I walked in circles holding up signs, this war, this Dow, that Walmart, Pfizer, you're next. There are sharks that sing to me of their extinction. Those gardenias by Billie Holiday's headstone, they're mine. I've taken to singing the last aria of Traviata with Violetta magically cured. Now, you might not like the music I like, the music I make. It might sound like pots and pans banged together, a technique perfected by Grandma Eva of Bialystok to bring us home from danger. She understood, with her chorus of oy veys, just how wrong everything could be. She was a friend to the helpless, the feckless, the miserable bastard I could be, readying me for every allergy, every bee sting, my bright future in a self-made monastery. But I won't be pulled along by some donkey with a plow. I don't want to cash in my bonds to buy a pontoon and putt-putt through lagoons on Sunday afternoons. I want a good Côte de Rhône, nothing fancy, a little bird, a smelly cheese, a few strokes from my beloved. if there's one in the room, and laugh tracks from Buster Keaton's silent films. And I'm going to end with a new poem. I'd like to begin where snow drapes the locust limbs, or better yet, near the rooms where we sit palomas and a pelican sat beside us, clacking so long I swore he serenaded us. I was a child when I caught a ball from my hero, and though he was no hero, I was blessed back then with no interest in judgment, so I could receive the world as my mind unwound it. So much wonder to squander. You know what happens next. The slippages in love, holding the baby above your head and listening to her inscrutable song. Goodbye, mother and father. Goodbye, my brother sent to Afghanistan for no good reason. There's too much to take in. The gifts and the grief, it's dizzying. It's like trying to swim in the wind-blown ocean, flailing around and gasping for air. I hung on when I should have let go, shouted when I should have stayed mute. It all ends where I'm by myself, while snow drapes the locust limbs. I'm out here for the sun and the chill, where high above my head, the woodpecker drills. Thank you for being here, even though I don't know you're here. I'm sure someone's here, yeah?